Alright, hey guys, welcome back to Internet Tomato, where we dive deep into the dark, twisted, and epic lore of Tainted Grail. I shall be your guide to unraveling the mysteries of Avalon. Today, we are continuing our lore series by going over the years prior to the fall of Avalon. This video aims to provide a balanced introduction for new players and fans alike, ensuring everyone walks away with more knowledge. Keep in mind that the lore is still developing, as Tainted Grail has games planned for the future to supplement what we know, and things are somewhat subject to change. Also, if you wouldn't mind, please like and subscribe, or you might just get turned into a menhir. So, let's get into this. So first off, I wanted to talk about two elephants in the room. For one, we are in version 1.1. Quirko has a whole new getup. He'll eventually change back to his original form, but this is one of the forms he can take. Feed him a sage and he'll look like this. Also, I have a little bit limited music choice as I record this video because I'm in the new game. I could head over to Quinacht and do some stuff, but I decided against it because I want to save that for the playthrough, because there might be some new things in version 1.1. The other thing is you might be hearing some kids while I'm recording. I apologize in advance. So, last we left off, we went over Arthur's reign and his return into Avalon. Nearly every settlement that exists in the fall of Avalon was founded during this period, and there was a deep-seated hope in humanity and humanity's future. The executors more or less retired, and we ended with Avalon being left to the Round Table to manage. In the Discord, which I'd love for you to join, I asked, how long do you think it took humanity to start falling apart before Arthur's first resurrection? It appears that you guys don't have that much faith in humanity, but who could blame you? We aren't given an exact date, which I will discuss later in the video, but let's just say you guys aren't wrong. With such an extraordinary man, there was no system or good group of men that could take the king's place and fill his shoes. After the Golden Age, Avalon was left to its own devices. With the menhirs stable for years and no immediate threats looming, yet harmony eluded humanity. In the decades following Arthur's death, the fragile peace began to fray. Though the exact crisis of the generation remains unclear, several years pass before a prioress took it upon herself to attempt Arthur's resurrection after his death, likely marking the first time that the once and future king was brought back. A tall prioress caresses the gray, malformed face of the dead king. She knows he suffered through so much, but Avalon can't afford to let him rest. The prioress gives a sign. Men clad in armor push Arthur's body into a large black cauldron. Almost immediately, the vessel bursts in a fountain of water and metal shards. You now see a magnificent monastery surrounded by a torrent of weirdness, turning earth into water and water into the ground. The building cracks and sinks around you. 100 horrified voices sound in unison. Using the Black Cauldron, also known as the Per Didani, or the Cauldron of Rebirth, the Allmother Prioress knew the risks of using the ancient artifact that was sacred to the cult of the Allmother. The Prioress's intimate gesture, caressing Arthur's face and knowing his suffering, suggests that she knew him personally. This leads me to two possibilities. First, she could be Kai, Arthur's sister, bringing her brother back. The description of her as tall is striking, as both Arthur and Mordred are often described similarly, and Kai shares their blood. However, she is generally associated with the Red Priests, rather than the Allmother Priestesses. The second possibility I hinted at about 10 episodes ago, Bonus points to those who remember. Arthur's Queen. In Tainted Grail, she appears in a painting with a brief story, but she is never named. Traditionally, this would be Lady Guinevere, who, after betraying Arthur, often becomes a prioress to atone for her sins. With Lancelot dead from the Age of Legends, Guinevere might have turned to the Père de Dany to resurrect Arthur during a crisis, only to unleash chaos that destroyed the All-Mother Temple and the Red Death Colony in the Dark Morass, solidifying the Red Priest's departure to the Island Asylum. Since the prioress knew Arthur personally, and since the deformation described happens about a month into a stone burial, this resurrection likely occurred within a year of his passing. However, we do see his body preserved in a vat in the RPG, so it is hard to judge. Arthur survived the catastrophic resurrection that obliterated the Dark Morass, an event that sealed the Red Priest's retreat to the Island Asylum. With the primary All-Mother Temple in Avalon reduced to ruins, the cult of the All-Mother turned nomadic, scattering temples across the island, from north to south and east to west. Arthur likely resolved the crisis of that era before returning to his grave. The disastrous resurrection spurred Nimue to intensify her work on perfecting the ritual. Determined to prevent fringe groups from attempting to bring Arthur back, she forged a pact. In future crises, the Round Table would formally request Merlin's apprentices to resurrect the king, binding them to the task. This agreement deterred smaller magically inclined factions from pursuing their own resurrections. For those who haven't seen my Merlin video, I've theorized that Merlin was a spiritual being, maybe even a demon, and his apprentices were likely his descendants. Since Nimue vanishes from records after the Golden Age, I suspect that she may have been Merlin's mortal wife, unlike the immortal Merlin or Orin. After Nimue's death, Orin took leadership of Merlin's apprentices. During the peak of the Age of Legends, dozens of apprentices thrived. But the devastating war with the Four Dwellers, Merlin's death, Nimue's passing, and one apprentice joining the Order of the Moonring reduced their numbers to a small handful. Holding his parents' vision of Arthur's resurrection close, Orin guarded their secrets, ensuring that he alone would bring the king back when the Round Table called. With each new generation, a fresh crisis emerged. Sometimes the executors' souls were summoned to Avalon. Other times, Orin and the Round Table would resurrect Arthur. But with each resurrection, he diminished. Arthur's memories frayed, barely stretching beyond his first life, and he suffered bouts of vacancy, often confused about his surroundings or purpose. Orin recognized this as a dire warning and tweaked the ritual repeatedly, hoping to mend the process, but to no avail. Arthur's soul fractured further with every turn. The Round Table saw this too, yet when Arthur sat on the throne, even with his lapses, he remained the once and future king. Nefarious factions spied an opportunity, scheming to manipulate the faltering king as a puppet. Though Arthur usually saw through these ploys, he grew increasingly dependent on the Round Table to act in his stead, struggling to grasp the era's complexities and modern advancements. After countless resurrections, the flawed ritual reached its breaking point. Arthur's mind was so shattered, he could scarcely hold a thought. The Round Table reduced him to a mere weapon, a hulk, directed to battle their enemies. The king Orin knew was now gone. With few left who recalled Arthur from the Age of Legends, Orin sought out Sir Caradoc, a friend. He was a lesser Round Table knight who had renounced his oaths after gaining immortality from Merlin and disagreeing with Arthur's decisions in the Age of Legends. Caradoc, listening to Orin's plight, suggested that he should abandon his tower at Connacht. Bound by vow to resurrect Arthur at the Round Table's command, Orin realized that if they couldn't find him, he'd be free of the obligation. Agreeing, he fled to Weird Edge, a remote islet in a lake very far to the west, where he continued his research, seeking a way to restore Arthur's soul. Roughly 200 years after the Age of Legends, a cataclysmic event reshaped Avalon. The lore never specifies its nature, but it nearly wiped out the Four Dwellers. Some speculate that the Round Table wielded Arthur to unleash this devastation, though the Four Dwellers' history of infighting could also be to blame. Whatever occurred, it was so monumental that all of Avalon took notice, leaving the Four Dwellers desolate. Many believed that only the Pale Lady survived, as sightings of her kind ceased entirely. Over time, the Four Dwellers faded into legend, with some even questioning if they were mere illusions born of the weirdness. Meanwhile, Avalon itself began a slow decline since the Age of Legends. The menhirs required relighting more frequently, and the weirdness, once confined beyond the Redwood Outpost, crept closer each year. Eventually, the outpost was abandoned, and small villages on the outskirts vanished overnight, their inhabitants swallowed by the encroaching weirdness. As weirdbeast sightings emerged, travelers dwindled. Noble houses rose and fell with the shifting times, while Morgaine, who had somehow attained immortality, manipulated these aristocrats like puppets. Though an outcast in the Age of Legends, she cunningly expanded her influence, silencing any who dared oppose her. Without Arthur to steer it true, Avalon spiraled into corruption, with Camelot growing ever more decadent. Morgaine rose to near queenly power in Avalon, proclaiming herself the rightful heir to the throne. With Orin refusing to resurrect Arthur and vanishing from sight, the court began to entertain Morgane's claims. Though most nobles still pledged loyalty to the Round Table, her influence grew as Avalon unraveled without Arthur to restore order. The nobles turned tyrannical, enacting absurd laws like declaring all horses property of Camelot and barring people from visiting Arthur's statue in the city. Camelot tightened its grip, demanding absolute control over Avalon, but targeting only those too weak to resist. These actions plunged the island into poverty. Bandits and weird creatures roamed the roads, terrifying merchants and stifling trade, which deepened the economic despair. Most Avalonians clung to the hope that Orin would return and resurrect Arthur, but their faith was fading. Others demanded reform, recognizing that while King Arthur was exceptional, the system was grown broken, oligarchic, and corrupt. Camelot's descent into the oppressive waves of the ancient kingdoms before Arthur's rule in Camlan betrayed his legacy. Whispers of revolt spread, with calls for a House of Commons to give the people true representation. The oligarchs' unchecked power, dictating laws, wars, and exploitation to cling to authority, felt tyrannical. The Round Table bore much of the blame for failing to curb the corruption early, yet challenging Morgaine was a death sentence. The knights struggled to uphold order and justice, but were weakened by poor candidates sent by the Moonring Druids, fueling rumors that Morgaine orchestrated their decline. It wasn't beyond the bounds of possibility that she may have handpicked certain knights to keep the Round Table complacent. Camelot's corruption was starkly evident in its inaction against the rampant slavery just 20 miles north in the Brochs. Slavers raided travelers on roads to Camelot's borough and those headed north, selling captives across Avalon, some even as human sacrifices to the children of Morrigan. Despite this atrocity unfolding on their doorstep, Camelot's government did nothing, wary of the political fallout from disrupting the nearby slave trade. They knew that many nobles benefited under the table through this illegal trade, and making enemies in this climate was a death warrant. The Round Table's inaction infuriated many. They saw it as a betrayal of justice. Lancelot would have argued that the knights were preoccupied with the encroaching weirdness, prioritizing it over confronting independent factions profiting from slavery. The noble knights of the Round Table were no match for Morgaine's cunning and the nobility's ire. Instead of dismantling the trade, they focused on the shared threat of the weirdness. Over generations, the Round Table saw knights come and go, some driven by duty and justice, others weak or ineffective. Yet two constants persisted: Morgaine's shadowy influence and Camelot's inability to destroy Crow's Nest, the impregnable fortress of Mordred and Morrigan. Humble souls at court who opposed the corruption faced grim fates, either silenced by Morgaine for challenging the system, or driven to abandon Camelot. Some, like Galahad, deserted entirely, while others sought refuge in Longbarrow. Perched on a hill overlooking the mouth of Tuathan, just miles from Crow's Nest, Longbarrow's fortress stood as a vigilant outpost. Its soldiers and knights slew beasts that emerged from the ancient Four-Dweller capital while keeping an eye on Mordred. The soldiers of Longbarrow were unguided and accepted almost anyone willing to take up a sword. Their order was not without flaws, but Longbarrow earned Avalon's respect as a bastion where those genuinely committed to protecting the people could be found. Disillusioned nobles who could no longer tolerate Camelot's corrupt court fled to Timberwall. Despite its reputation for cutthroats and cheats, the city offered a better chance of survival than crossing Morgaine. Timberwall grew in power and influence with each passing year, surpassing even Camelot's traders. Its reach extended across Avalon, from Quanacht to Falfoir, Farshire to Crow's Nest, inadvertently slowing the island's decline. While Camelot neglected to secure the roads, Timberwall's mercenary companies protected merchants, slaying highwaymen and, by extension, making travel safer for the locals. Camelot's priorities remained self-serving, with its armies deployed only to benefit the nobility, always traceable to Morgaine's iron grip. Meanwhile, Farshire rose to prominence, built on the ruins of a vast settlement from the Age of Legends. Its sprawling farmhold believed it was blessed by an ancient ritual, and it yielded bountiful harvests, feeding nearly half of Avalon. Farshire's scholars preserved centuries of history, earning the city a reputation for learning. South of Crow's Nest, where the Reach once stood, lay halfway. 4 major roads meet on a mist-covered plateau, and in the place of their convergence stands a small group of stone huts. For centuries, merchants and feuding families met here to perform trades and settle their differences. The stone benches by the gathering place are worn by centuries of use. Above all, an ancient grudge stone looms in the mists, its face scarred by runes, telling stories of old grievances, feuds, legal settlements, and important trades. With Camelot refusing to lead, Avalonians took matters into their own hands. Upholding traditions of negotiating peace and trade at halfway, and inscribing the outcomes on the Grudgestone. Despite Camelot's failures, the people adapted, surviving and thriving without relying on the capital. Each city, culture, society, and home changed every few generations, and much of humanity's history was written during these days. Sadly, most of it is now lost to us, as there are countless contradicting accounts. I like to call this time between the Golden Age and the fall of Avalon the Dark Ages, since we both know little of the intricacies, and that what we do know is of the darkness that took hold on Avalon. Orin finally returned with a daring plan to save Avalon from its deepening despair. Each resurrection had left Arthur's soul increasingly fractured, so Orin devised a way to restore him fully by reuniting his human body, human soul, and Four-Dweller soul as they were in the Age of Legends. This, he believed, would allow Arthur to rule from Camelot for decades, uprooting the slave trade, abolishing tyrannical laws, opening the city's gates to the people, and purging its corruption. Only Arthur possessed the wisdom, prowess, and authority to restore Avalon to its Golden Age glory. Orin shared this plan with Sir Caradog, who had been disillusioned with Avalon's state since abandoning the Round Table. The people suffered under Camelot's exploitative rule, trapped by a system that stifled change. Caradog agreed to help, and they began pulling strings and calling in favors to make it happen. Orin's plan hinged on creating an empty vessel to house Arthur's human and Four-Dweller souls. His research suggested it was possible, but there was a catch. The vessel would be a human with their own will, opinions, and dreams. As Orin and Caradog hashed this out with all the details, tensions emerged. Caradog saw Arthur not as a solution, but as part of the problem, believing the people's blind devotion to their king fostered inaction and folly. He wanted Arthur's final death to force humanity to forge a society free of his shadow, a sink-or-swim moment. By the time Orin realized that Caradog's resolve had turned to arrogance, their plans were already in motion. His closest friend had become his mortal enemy. Caradog refused any compromise, vowing to slay the newly risen Arthur to end his legacy forever. Orin, whom death itself once said, "His is the greatest mind ever to grace Avalon," would prove pivotal in the trials ahead. He will play multiple roles in this saga, wielding wisdom beyond his years, knowledge of a lost age, and the humility of the greatest of men. In the next one, we will be going over what happened between the Golden Age and the fall of Avalon. But for now, please like and subscribe. Consider joining our Discord for random polls and Tainted Grail chats. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to be seeing you guys in the next one. See ya. See you later. Bye-bye.